Welcome back, Defenders. Jake here. So this last weekend, I had some friends come and stay with me here in Las Vegas. I pre-recorded the question and answer video. I pre-recorded the podcast episode with Anna from Ukraine. And I hoped that nothing significant would happen over the weekend because I'd be unable to film an update video. And wow, a lot of significant things happened over the last 4 days. So we're going to get caught up in today's video. On top of that, I woke up this morning with a slight sore throat. I took some medicine. I'm drinking some tea. We're going to power through today's video. And let's start with the casualty counts, the estimate given by Ukraine. It's now estimated that over 400,000 soldiers fighting for Russia have been killed in this war the last 2 years. This number counts absolutely everyone, be they regular Russian military, Wagner mercenaries, Ukrainian citizens in the LPR and DPR militias, Somalis, Nepalese, Syrians, whoever Russia can find that's dumb enough to go to Ukraine and fight for them. This number doesn't really matter. This number could hit 4 million, and I don't think the Russian people are ever going to take to the streets and rise up. The death of their own people in this war of conquest is not going to be enough. What would trigger ordinary Russians to take to the streets? And it would require economic collapse. The fact that Russians couldn't afford to buy groceries, their own immediate self-survival, not a distant war in Ukraine. This is the big story. Russian opposition leader Navalny killed in prison. The 47-year-old was Russia's most prominent opposition leader and won a huge following with his criticism of corruption in Putin's Russia. Vladimir Putin might be the most successfully corrupt person in the history of the world. By some estimates, Putin is the richest man who ever lived, having stolen the wealth of Russia over the last 24 years. And with Navalny, he was a symbol. He was a symbol of the opposition, and Putin couldn't stand that he even was still alive. So Putin did try to kill Navalny. Years ago, he poisoned him. Navalny received treatment in Germany, returned to Russia knowing that he would be imprisoned by Putin. And if you remember, 2 months ago, Navalny disappeared because Putin sent him to this Siberian prison, IK3. We can zoom in so you can see what it looks like. There's only one way in and out of this former Soviet gulag. This is the most remote prison in the world, and it's this train route. So Navalny had no hope. He had no escape. Putin definitely sent him there to die, whether killed by a fellow prisoner, death by the cold. It is Siberia in the wintertime. But I think Putin wanted him gone, and he wanted to kill him without the ability for anyone to see what happened. So Navalny previously was in a prison in Moscow, but there's just way too many people in Moscow that could take a picture or a video and get that information out. So in order to kill Navalny, Putin first had to send him to this IK3 Siberian prison, and the job was eventually completed. Now, the Russians are going to say the official cause of death is sudden death syndrome. A perfectly healthy 49-year-old man just dropped dead. Unfortunate, I'm sure Putin believes. But why won't the Russians hand over Navalny's body? Navalny's killers refusing to hand over the body, detaining mourners. Not only is Russia saying they're going to wait 14 days to release his body, they're going to have to put it back on the train from Siberia to get it to Moscow or St. Petersburg. So that's probably going to be another 3 weeks. So nobody who cares about Navalny is going to be able to see his body probably for over a month. This is the joke online. This is the parody account Darth Putin. We will release the body in 14 days. In unrelated news, the poison will decay in 13 days. Russian state media stays silent or cynical in the coverage of Navalny's death. Navalny was the opposition leader. This is insane that Russian state media doesn't want to talk about it. They don't want to say his name. Russia does not have freedom of speech. They don't have freedom of press. There are no independent journalists remaining inside Russia. They've all been imprisoned, killed, or exiled. Russia is the most fascist country in the world. It's a prison state, and currently 140 million Russians are trapped in this prison. Kremlin pushes to extinguish grieving for Navalny as the election nears. I can share with you countless videos online that have gone viral of Russian police officers beating women, beating elderly people, trying to lay flowers, pay their last respects to Navalny, who was a very significant and well-liked political leader, before Putin decided to kill him the first time 4 years ago. I'll link these clips down below if you want to see the violence for yourself. Obviously, I can't play these clips online. And Putin and the Russians are cracking down on anyone willing to entertain the idea that Navalny's death should be mourned. Russian courts hand out jail terms to hundreds of Navalny supporters. It's only been a weekend, and already 154 people have been sentenced to jail time in St. Petersburg alone. There's no hope for Russia in its current state. Anyone that believes that the state can be salvaged, how do you come back from this? This is absolute evil. So I never really talked about Navalny here on the channel because Navalny was still an imperialist. He was still a nationalist. He stated that Russia should be in control of Crimea. Under no circumstances should Crimea ever be returned to Ukraine. I think he eventually softened that position the last 2 years, but prior to Putin's full-scale invasion, that was his official position. He was a Russian nationalist, but had a different vision for Russia, one less authoritarian than Putin, but that's a very low bar. And I'm going to argue, this might be controversial, that Navalny wasn't doing anyone any good, remaining alive in prison. Every day he remained in prison the last 2 years, he became less and less relevant. So in death, Navalny will be made a martyr. Russians in exile, Western opposition governments, they're going to martyr Navalny any way they can. Never stop talking about this guy. Never let it go that Putin killed the only other prominent politician that might have been president someday. So here's a tweet from Bill Browder. He's been Russia's worst nightmare the last 10 years as far as advocating for additional sanctions on Russia. And this is what Bill Browder has to say. Everybody is scrambling on what the West should do in response to Putin's assassination of Navalny. If we really want to hit Putin where it hurts, Western governments should confiscate the frozen $300 billion of Russia's central bank reserves, and we should call that the Navalny Act. Navalny's name can never die. He's a martyr now. Someday in Russia, once Putin's government has collapsed, we're going to have elementary schools named after Navalny, bridges named after Navalny. And I love this idea from Bill Browder. We should seize Russia's frozen assets, send them to Ukraine to fight this war, and call it the Navalny Act. I'm sad that he died. I definitely didn't want Navalny to die, but I think Navalny knew this was a possibility when he got on the plane from Germany and returned to Russia. Hopefully, Russia after this war can be reborn, and the legacy of Navalny can help Russians find a new peace in this world. The other big story is that Ukrainian troops have successfully withdrawn from the frontline city of Avdiivka. We can switch the military map. You can see Avdiivka was more or less surrounded on 3 sides. So people staring at the map the last 2 months were saying, when is Ukraine going to pull out? And Ukraine the frontline defenders, they did their job. The goal of Ukraine's military right now is to hold the Russians off until they can be resupplied by the Western allies. So the casualty rates for the Russians in the city of Avdiivka were 7-1, 8-1, 10-1. But as soon as the Russians got into the city, and you're doing block-to-block fighting, the advantage is gone. This is the lesson we learned from Bakhmut. So as soon as there was a breakthrough, and Russian infantry were capable of getting into the city from the north side, Ukraine's advantage was gone. Being in the city, looking out across the fields, that gave Ukraine the ratio advantage. But this was the correct move. This was the correct decision to pull out of Avdiivka. I know Ukraine wanted to deny Putin the propaganda win prior to his election, but the election's going to turn out the same way regardless. So here's the cost. This is what Russia paid. Russian forces lost almost 50,000 soldiers in 4 months fighting for Avdiivka. This was Russia's winter military campaign objective, and they achieved it. They were willing to pay any price. They don't care how many of their soldiers die. They don't care how many vehicles they lost. They don't care what price they're paying to advance on a relatively insignificant town. I know there's an argument to be made. Its proximity to Donetsk. Ukraine really wanted to hold this suburb, but the pre-war population of this town was 32,000, and Russia lost over 50,000 just in the last 4 months fighting for it. And I want to once again put in perspective how incompetent the Russian military is. Prior to this full-scale invasion, everyone said Russia was the number 2 military in the world. And Russia's had to rely. They've had to beg for help from the Iranians and the North Koreans. So the combined military might of Iran, North Korea, and Russia spent 4 months of direct assaults to capture a village with a pre-war population of only 32,000. How is Russia ever going to take Zaporizhia, population 700,000? How is Russia ever going to take Kharkiv, population 1.5 million? How are they ever going to take the city of Odessa? Once again, population over 1 million. So this isn't the end, and I know when you zoom in, it looks scary when you don't, once again, respect the scale. So let's get the ruler out and just look at Russia's great military victory. This is where they started, and this is where they've gotten in 2 years. 2 years of fighting, and they've advanced 7 kilometers. Now let's get rid of this ruler, and Russia's stated objective is to get from here to the territorial boundary of Donetsk. That's another 60 kilometers. At the rate they're going, this is going to take the Russians another 10 years to get the entirety of the Donbass region. Russia doesn't have 10 years. Let me share with you some really sad pictures. This is what the village of Marinka looked like before the Russians said it was theirs. And this is what Marinka looks like now. This is what Avdiivka looked like prior to the Russians saying this city was theirs. And this is what Marinka looks like now. Russia is incapable of liberating cities without killing all the people and destroying all the buildings. That's the only way they could advance. For people who support Russia, this is immoral, this is pathetic. They don't care that entire cities are destroyed and that all these people are killed. I'll never understand it. Russia's Avdiivka losses are higher than the entire Soviet-Afghan war. The Soviets, the Russians, spent a decade fighting in Afghanistan, and Putin lost more soldiers in the last 4 months taking this one village than the Soviets lost in a decade fighting in Afghanistan. I'll link this clip down below if you want to see some heroic video of Ukrainian defenders. Now that they've pulled out of the city, they're taking the time to upload pictures and videos they have on their cell phones. So this video from Dimitri at War Translated takes place underground in the coke plants. This is on the north side of the city. Someday, we're going to get some pretty amazing drama series and documentaries after Ukraine has won this war. But if you want to see this week what these guys were enduring with these bombs dropping on this coke factory, I'll link this down below. NATO chief warns U.S. aid delay harming Ukraine's battle against Russia. This is the most obvious news article headline ever. Officially, here in the United States, military funding for Ukraine expired on October 1st. This was almost 6 months ago, and for almost 6 months, MAGA Republicans in the House have been blocking a vote on additional military aid for Ukraine. Yes, this is having an effect on the battlefield. This is how Russia was able to capture the city of Avdiivka. It's time to stop entertaining these people, that they're negotiating or acting in good faith, talking about border security or accountability or a clear path to victory. It's all lies from American politicians to help Russia. Everyone in the West needs to name and shame these MAGA Republicans because they're doing it on purpose. Here's the language from President Biden. Lack of ammunition forced Ukraine to retreat from Avdiivka. And I know with numbers, that helps you understand more clearly what the impact was. Here's a tweet from Andrew Roth putting this in perspective. In November, this Ukrainian unit's men, they were getting about 300 shells every 10 days to hold the Russians back. But because the United States is no longer supplying artillery to Ukraine from our own inventory, they were only firing 10 a day. That was their ration. Back then, we could keep them on their toes, fire all the time, aim each time we saw a target. Now we fire only for defense. This is why Avdiivka fell. So here are the two guys working the hardest to ensure that Russia wins this war. Donald Trump, in my opinion, has made a pact with other dictators around the world. Kim Jong-un of North Korea, Putin of Russia, Xi of China, Iran. As long as you help me become president of the United States again, I'm not going to interfere in anything you want to do. For any dictator around the world, if you want to attack and invade your smaller neighbors, talk about respecting historical borders, Donald Trump's not going to do anything. All he wants to do is get back into the White House and have power for himself. So Donald Trump put MAGA Speaker Mike Johnson in this position, specifically to block this military aid package. Military aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, to embolden and strengthen Iran, China, and Russia. Name and shame, we have to speak the truth. This is what is happening. Mike Johnson knew that if he scheduled a vote, it would get a supermajority and pass. So this is unfortunate, but Mike Johnson actually can't stop this vote. Eventually, the Democrats are going to get through the discharge process, and they're going to pass this military aid for Ukraine. But Mike Johnson can do a lot to delay it, slow it down. The discharge process, as I understand it, takes over 30 days to get this forced vote. So what Mike Johnson did is he just sent Congress into recess for 2 weeks. He gave every member of the House a 2-week paid vacation in February. And Mike Johnson decided to go down to Florida to hang out with Donald Trump. We're blocking military aid for Ukraine. We're helping Russia win. Double thumbs up. Zelensky says he's ready to take Trump to the Ukrainian front line. For almost 2 years now, Donald Trump has had an open invite to come to Ukraine and see Russian war crimes for himself. Donald Trump's never going to go to Ukraine. He doesn't want to see or speak to Zelensky. He supports Putin and the Russians. And to put this in perspective, this is a statement you'll never see from Donald Trump. This is Donald Trump's vice president, Mike Pence. And this is what Mike Pence said on Twitter. Putin is a war criminal and only understands strength. Russia's unprovoked and brutal invasion of Ukraine has killed or wounded hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men, women, and children. Russia's brutality must be met with American strength. I'm not being partisan. Thank you so much to Republican Mike Pence for your strong statements, for your defense of democracy, for supporting Ukraine. We're having an election here in the United States in 7 or 8 months. Please don't vote or support for anyone who doesn't support democracy around the world. Washington Insider, new poll shows U.S. support for Ukraine is strong, despite congressional inaction to send military support for Ukraine. 73% of Americans say the war in Ukraine is important to American interests. This number is going higher than it was 6 months ago. This seems like a really bad election strategy for MAGA Republicans. Like, if they want to win seats, if they want to gain majorities, doing the opposite of what 73% of American voters want seems like a really bad idea. But Ukraine is going to carry on the fight any way they can. It doesn't really matter if the United States continues to militarily support Ukraine. Ukraine's never going to surrender. This is a genocide. Russia is coming to steal their children, destroy their cities, enslave their people. It's a fight to the death. And Ukraine is going to use whatever resources that are willingly given to them. They appreciate it, but they're never going to stop. Kyiv claims 6 Russian jets downed in 3 days. Of the 6 jets claimed destroyed by Ukraine, Russian sources, usually military bloggers, are only willing to confirm 2. The exact cause remains unclear. They're Patriot launchers. Patriot launchers are shooting down all of these Russian planes. And Russia refuses to acknowledge this is a possibility. They keep sending their planes and pilots to the combat line to get shot down by this roaming Patriot launcher. So these 2 jets were shot down in the Zaporizhia region, close to the city of Mariupol. And we do have a video confirming at least one. I'll link this down below if you want to see what it looks like when a Russian jet gets shot out of the sky by a Patriot launcher. Bravo. Russian defector helicopter pilot shot dead in Spain. This is a sad story. 28-year-old Captain Maxim Kuzminov seized control of a Russian armored combat Mi-8 helicopter and brought it safely to an airbase in the Kharkiv region in August of 2023. This was a big news story when it occurred. This dude stole his helicopter and delivered it to Ukraine for the $500,000 reward. Ukraine gave him a passport. He probably should have stayed in Ukraine to remain alive, but he chose to travel to the EU, and he was in Spain trying to live his life. Because he betrayed Putin, I'm sure agents were sent in to kill him, to send a message to other would-be Russian defectors. And if I'm being honest about this Russian man, he was probably going to die anyways. If he kept flying helicopters for the Russian military, eventually he was going to get killed on the battlefield. So he might have actually lived longer, having done the right thing and surrendering himself and this helicopter. But this is alarming, that the Russians can send their agents at will into Western democracies and assassinate Russian defectors. This is not okay. Every country in the West should be doing more to make sure this isn't possible, that this doesn't happen for the good Russians who do the right thing and choose to defect to the West. Let's get to the good news for Ukraine. And the Danish Prime Minister announced that Denmark will transfer all of its artillery to Ukraine and called on European states to provide more ammunition. Thank you so much to the people of Denmark. Japan will earmark 1.25 billion euros to support Japanese investors in Ukraine. The Japanese Foreign Ministry also announced 105 million in aid to Ukraine in the form of grants. Thank you so much, Japan. You guys are incredible. Final couple of things I want to share with you. I just want to share what the Ukrainian defenders wrote on a building close to the front lines. It just says we are not asking too much. We just need artillery shells and aviation. We'll do the rest ourselves. The Armed Forces of Ukraine. It's really not that much to ask for. Final clip I want to share with you actually comes from the Las Vegas sphere. I live in Las Vegas, driving around. It's pretty noticeable. This is what the sphere looks like, and it's always lit up, usually with either something funny or an advertisement. And currently, the rock band U2 has a residency at the sphere. And after learning of Navalny's death, lead singer Bono chose to speak to the audience about his passing. That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Until the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.